All right, so we're going to be talking about special senses for the rest of the course. And so, what we're going to begin with is the sense of vision, which is one of the most important senses because it's where we get about 90% of our information. We see people, we see colors, we see the environment, we can look for danger. All of those will create this spark of memory, but also to warn us of our surroundings if we need to get away, and it can alter our movement patterns. It can alter our autonomic system. So you might remember this dress. Well, what do you see? Is it a gold and white, or is it a blue dress? So blue and black. So I see a white and gold dress, but other people have seen blue and black, and it plays tricks on our sense of vision. So the special senses that we're going to be discussing are from special sensory receptors. So they're very distinct receptors, localized receptors. They're cells in the head. So when you think about vision, taste, smell, hearing, equilibrium, all of them are found in the head and nowhere else. You can't taste anything with your finger. Okay? So our vision is going to be from a photoreceptor. Our taste is from a chemoreceptor. Smell is from a chemoreceptor. Hearing is from a mechanoreceptor, as well as equilibrium. So these two are going to play a role in the ear, and there are mechanoreceptors. This will be the nose and the mouth, which will be chemoreceptors, and then this will be a photoreceptor, which is the only place you'll find a photoreceptor in the body. So 70% of the body's sensory receptors are in the eye. That's absolutely incredible because you have billions of sensory receptors throughout your body, and if 70% of them are in a small little portion of your eye, that tells you how important vision is for your ability to maintain homeostasis and getting around in the environment. So visual processing is by about half of the cerebral cortex. So you're constantly processing this information, and you're relating it to past memories. You're integrating that information. You're figuring out what it all means and how you adapt to it. Most of the eye is protected by a cushion of fat and the bony orbit. So you do have a lot of components surrounding your eye that will protect it, like a hard case and a soft case. So the cushion of fat would be the soft case. Make sure the delicate eye doesn't get damaged, but you also need to have the bony orbit and the skull that surrounds your eye so that you can protect it from any of the trauma, the falls, the trips, everything that happens in day-to-day life. So the accessory structures of the eye are going to be important. You're going to want to know these for the examination. So we're going to be looking at this picture and others, and you're going to need to be able to tell me what different parts of the eye are. And that might also come up on the last lab quiz. So eyebrows. Eyebrows are above the eye, so they're superior and slightly anterior to the eye, and they're going to be hair that is going to actually protect your eye from sweat and from sunlight so that you don't get sweat that rolls into your eyes. Your eyelids are going to be protecting your body from any sort of hair or dust that can get potentially into the eye. So they're going to be lining the eye. The eyelids are going to be lining the eye. They will spread your tears, and they will also have hairs on them, the eyelashes that will help protect from other invaders that could potentially infect the eye. The conjunctiva is going to be the layer on the anterior surface of the eye that will protect it from any sort of bacteria or viruses to get in. And conjunctivitis is going to be the inflammation of that region, and that would be like pink eye, which can be caused by a viral or a bacterial infection. Your lacrimal apparatus is going to be your tear glands, so they are going to be in your superior lateral portion of the eye, and that will secrete tears, which will lubricate the eye keep them moist and maintain the proper environment. They also have other components that will shield you from different invaders. And then you have extrinsic eye muscles, and those eye muscles are present in order to move the eye so that you don't have to look straight forward all the time. You can adapt to close vision, you can adapt for far vision, you can move your eyes to the left, to the right, up, down in that H pattern so that you can see your surroundings without having to move your entire head. So if we look at the eye from the gross anatomical position, up here you can see the eyebrow, so that's going to protect you from sweat from the forehead getting into the eyes. Also, it will shade some of the sunlight as long as you're not looking directly at the sun. You have your eyelid here, and then your eyelashes. Your lacrimal gland will be up in this region. Okay, your palpebral fissure is going to be the opening of the eyelids where you can actually see your eye. So you collect the light from the environment in the pupil here only when the eyelids are open, and that's going to come into the eye and shine directly on the retina, which will be in the back where you have all of your photoreceptors. Okay, the lacrimal puncta and caruncle are over here. So this entire area here will be layered by the conjunctiva. So let's start with the eyebrows. They overlie the supraorbital margins, so they shade eye from the sunlight. When it is very bright outside and you're looking straight forward, your eyebrows will actually shade some of the light that comes in, so you do not have to damage your eyes by direct sunlight. They also prevent perspiration from reaching the eyes. So when you're sweating, if you don't have eyebrows, sweat is more likely to get into your eye, and that can actually sting because the sweat does not belong in your eye. It is very salty and it can dry out the eyes, and so your tears are actually going to be better suited for the purpose of maintaining the moisture in the eye. Eyelids protect the eye anteriorly, so they are separated at the palpebral fissure, which is going to be the opening between the two eyelids. So you have the superior and inferior eyelid. When you're sleeping, when you are blinking, your eyelids close and the palpebral fissure will be almost non-existent. And they meet at the medial and lateral commissures. So the portion of the eye that is closest to the nose and the one that is farthest away from the nose, those areas where they meet are known as the commissures. And the lateral caruncle, or the lacrimal caruncle, you can have that at the medial commissure. That's where you collect tears. That's why it's known as the lacrimal caruncle, and it's at the medial commissure, so it's closest to your nose. You collect the tears in that region, and actually your tears will drain into your sinuses, which is why you have runny noses when you cry. They also contain oil and sweat glands. They won't be going directly into the eye, but they will be found right at that portion. Okay, your eyelid muscles. You have the levator palpebrae superioris. Now, based on the name of that muscle, you can tell exactly what it does. Levator, it elevates. Superioris, well, above the eye, so it's going to elevate the upper eyelid, and the palpebrae is going to be the eyelid. So it gives upper eyelid mobility. And so when you are looking at something, your levator palpebrae superioris is going to be contracted. When you are blinking, it relaxes for a brief moment, and then it is going to contract again. Okay, so you blink reflexively every 3 to 7 seconds, and that's a protective mechanism. You maintain the moisture of the eye because it spreads the tears or the lacrimal secretions from the upper, so the superior lateral portion of the eye through the rest of the eyeball to maintain the moisture, and also to get rid of anything that might have gotten in the eye, like dust or dirt or hair, whatever the case is. It's going to moisten the eye and then flush out anything else that belongs. So if you get something in your eye, you tend to blink more often, you secrete more tears, and those are reflexes that are going to try to protect your eye. Your eyelashes, okay, those are going to be the hairs on your eyelids. They have nerve endings of the follicles that initiate the blinking reflex. So if you get too close to the eye, if something is getting close to the eye, it initiates that reflex where you blink and you are trying to protect your eye from anything that might get in. So like an insect, if an insect is coming closer to your eye, if you get somebody's finger that gets close to your eye, because I know people hate that, it will cause that reflex of blinking. So lubricating glands associated with eyelids are going to be the tarsal and the ciliary glands. So the tarsal, also known as the meibomian, are going to be modified sebaceous glands. So sebaceous glands were your oil glands. So when you modify them, you still get an oily secretion that lubricates the lid and the eyes. So it's not going to have the same exact secretion, but it's similar. The gland will look the same, and it's found on the eyelid by the eyelashes. So it's similar in that regard, where it's found by the hair roots. Okay, ciliary glands are found between the hair follicles, and those are modified sweat glands. Okay, so the sweat glands secrete the sweat, which is going to release different chemicals and ions like sodium, and it helps get rid of some of the toxins in the body, but it also serves the purpose of cooling the body as well. Okay, so this is going to be a lateral view of the eye. So you can see the conjunctiva, and here's what's known as the conjunctival sac. So the conjunctiva lines the eye, but also lines the eyelid. So you can see the conjunctiva coming in and folding in on itself superiorly and inferiorly. So it comes down here, and that's actually where you're going to have your contacts sit if you wear them, so that way it doesn't travel posterior into the eye. Okay, so this is going to be another protective layer of the eye to protect the delicate tissues. So the eyelid here, and then you have the eyelid here, and this is the palpebral fissure. So the levator superioris or levator palpebrae superioris muscles right here. Right now it's contracted, so it's pulling the eyelid up. And when it's relaxed, the eyelid will come down. Okay, so the eyelashes right here, if anything gets close to the eye, it causes that reflex. Also, if you take a cotton swab and you whisk the conjunctiva or the cornea, it'll actually cause a corneal reflex, which means that you're going to blink and tear to try to get rid of whatever is in the eye. It sounds cruel, but that is something that you learn in medical school to create that reflex to see if your cranial nerves are functioning properly. There's several other ways that you can do it too. It can just be air, like a wind coming into the eye that causes that reflex. You can stimulate the eyelashes, things like that. So by the end of the lecture, you should know what most of these terms are. There's a couple exceptions, but we already know the orbicularis or oculi muscle. Okay, and then we also talked about the eyelashes, the palpebral fissure. We're going to be discussing the cornea in depth, as well as some of the other tissues here. So the conjunctiva is a transparent mucous membrane. Okay, it's got to be transparent because you got to have light passing through it. If you don't see. Okay, so it produces a lubricating mucus secretion that maintains its moisture, and you have three different components. You have the palpebral conjunctiva, which is going to line the eyelid. Okay, so palpebra is going to be for eyelid. Bulbar is going to be the eyeball or the bulb. Okay, and the bulbar conjunctiva covers the whites of the eye. Okay, so that is going to be actually sitting on the eyeball on the anterior portion. Okay, it's not going to be surrounding the entire eyeball, and we can see that if we do dissections of the eyeballs. Usually we can, but I don't believe we have any on campus. The conjunctival sac is going to be between the palpebral and the bulbar conjunctiva, where it indents, and that's where the contact lens rests. So when we showed you here, here's the bulbar conjunctiva, here's the palpebral conjunctiva, and they're going to overlap each other right over here, and this right here is the conjunctival sac. So it's that area that can hold the eye contact lens. So the lacrimal gland and the lacrimal apparatus. The lacrimal gland is going to be your tear gland. Okay, so whenever you think lacrimal, think tears. Okay, so the lacrimal gland and ducts will drain into the nasal cavities. So again, when you are crying, when you have excessive tears, you tend to blow your nose a lot because the lacrimal glands will drain into the nasal cavity. So the lacrimal gland is in the orbit above the lateral end of the eye, so superior lateral portion. This makes complete sense that it's there because when you secrete tears, they're going to be affected by gravity. And so you take it from the superior portion, secrete the tears, it will gravity will take it from the superior portion to the inferior portion, okay? And as you contract or relax, I should say, the levator palpebrae superioris, you push that tear down farther, and it acts almost like windshield wipers, where you blink, you spread the tears from the lateral end to the medial end, and it covers the entire eyeball when you open that back up. So lacrimal secretion, also known as tears, will be a dilute saline solution containing mucus, antibodies, and lysozymes. Okay, so antibodies, well, what do you think that's going to do? That's going to kill off any bacteria that gets into the eye. And how often do you think that happens? All the time. Because your body contains more bacterial cells than you have human cells. And most of those are going to lie on the surface of the skin or in the digestive tract. Okay, so your eyes want to be extra protected, so bacteria is going to constantly be getting into the eyes, and you're going to fight it off by the tears that you secrete. So your antibodies are going to be protecting your eye from developing any sort of inflammation. Okay, mucus, because that is going to also maintain that lubrication without drying out completely. And then you have lysozymes, which can break down harmful products that get into your eyes. And all of that should be transparent so that you can get light coming into the eye that is not obstructed. So blinking will spread tears towards the medial commissure where it drains. Okay, and tears will enter the paired lacrimal canaliculi via the lacrimal puncta. I know there's a lot of words here. Whenever you see lacrimal, you better be thinking tears. Okay, so the lacrimal puncta will be openings into these lacrimal canaliculi, which are little canals. So puncta is an opening. It's like a puncture, okay? And you open into these little canals, canaliculi. Canal is a canal, and then iculi is going to be a smaller canal. So these little openings go into these little canals that drain into this lacrimal sac. Okay, so it's a bag. It's a sac. Okay, sac is a bag. So it's going to drain into that sac, which will then go into the nasolacrimal duct. So nasal for the nose, lacrimal tears. So nasal tear duct essentially is what it means. So if we look at how this actually works, here are your lacrimal glands. So your superior lateral portion of the eye. Okay, so it's not actually in the eye, it's just above into the outside of the eye. You secrete tears into the upper eyelid that are going to then go down to the lower portion of the eye because of gravity, and also when you blink, you're going to spread those tears inferiorly and across, because when you push the tears down here, well, when this lower eyelid also comes up, it will spread those tears left and right, so it spreads them across, and it will eventually push it away from the lacrimal gland. Some will escape out of the eye, and that's when you have an overproduction, such as crying, So that could be emotional crying, or it could be that you have something in your eye and you have that overproduction of tears, and it'll try to push those products out of the eye. Okay, so it'll spread those tears, or the lacrimal secretions, over towards the medial commissure, where you have these lacrimal puncta. So those are the little openings, okay, little openings up here that will go into these lacrimal canaliculi. So those little canals that go into the lacrimal sac. Okay, so the lacrimal sac is going to be the bag, or the larger opening, and it will go into the nasal lacrimal duct. So you're draining your tears into the inferior meatus of the nasal cavity. So this is going to be more towards the posterior portion. Okay, so where does this then drain? Well, it can either drain out the nose, which will be when you have an overproduction of tears. You get some that roll down your face. You get some that go, a lot that go into this portion here, and then you might have to blow your nose more because you get a buildup of tears. And then some of them will also go into the nasopharynx, which will then essentially be swallowed. Okay. So the extrinsic eye muscles. Those are 6 strap-like extrinsic eye muscles in the eyes that allow you to look up, down, left, right, and then in combinations of those 4. Okay, so they originate from the bony orbit and they insert on the eyeball. Okay, so they connect from the skull, the bony orbit, onto the eye, and when they contract, well, the skull's not moving, so the eye has to move. And the eye will move laterally, it can move medially, superiorly, inferiorly, or in an oblique pattern when multiple muscles fire, or when you have the oblique muscles firing. So they enable the eye to follow moving objects, maintain shape of the eyeball, and they hold it in orbit. Okay, so it protects it so that it doesn't pop out if you have a fall. Okay, yes, that does not happen like in Pirates of the Caribbean. So you have the maintaining of the shape of the eyeball as well. So you keep some sort of tone in those muscles that maintain the shape so that your eye doesn't distort. And if it does, then you have a difficult time seeing. Some things will be seen differently. Okay, so this is what the eye muscles will look like. So you have the different rectus muscles, and then you have the oblique muscles. And the rectus muscles are going to go directly from the one side of the orbit into the same portion of the eye, and it moves it in that direction. So, for example, the lateral rectus muscle is going to attach to the lateral portion of the eyeball and move the eyeball laterally so that you can look from side to side. Okay. The medial rectus muscle is going to be towards the medial commissure. It's going to move the eyeball medially so you can look at something directly in front of you. Okay, and then you have the oblique muscles. Now here's the inferior oblique muscle. You can see it goes from the inferior portion of the bony orbit, wraps around the eyeball, and attaches on the lateral portion. Well, if this contracts, what do you think it does? It's going to move the eye superior and medial. Okay, and the superior oblique is going to do the exact opposite. You see the muscle comes up here, it goes through this ligament known as the trochlea, and it goes through and attaches to the superior and lateral portion of the eye. So when you contract that muscle, it pulls the eye so that you look inferior and laterally. So it goes in the opposite direction, essentially. So here is a chart that shows what cranial nerves control the muscle and what the action is. And again, look at the rectus muscle. The lateral rectus moves the eye lateral. The medial rectus moves the eye medial. The superior rectus elevates the eye. The inferior rectus depresses the eye, moves it inferior. Okay, the inferior oblique, well, it is going to elevate the eye, so it does the exact opposite of what the name is. The name says that it is telling you where it inserts into the eye. The superior oblique is going to depress the eye. Okay, so the rectus muscles move it in the direction of the name. The obliques move it in the direction opposite of the name. So the controlling cranial nerve, well, there's 4 of them that are the oculomotor, so I would recommend you learn the exceptions to the rule. What is the abducens? Well, it's going to cause abduction of the eye, which moves the eye laterally, and that is going to be your lateral rectus. You also have the trochlear. Now, the trochlear is going to be your superior oblique. And the easiest way to remember that is the oblique, the superior oblique goes through the trochlea, which is this ligament right here. That is the trochlea. Okay, so your superior rectus comes up, wraps around the trochlea, and then inserts on the superior lateral portion of the eye. So those would be the easiest ways to memorize the muscles in the eye. You test these by doing the H pattern. You have somebody look and watch your finger moving in an H pattern, and you can actually test 3 cranial nerves, the abducens, the oculomotor, and the trochlea. And if you go and you move your finger towards that person, you can see for pupillary constriction, which will again test the oculomotor as well. So, what is the structure of the eyeball? Well, the structure is going to be in 3 different layers. So we're going to break it down into 3 layers, discuss each one of those individually. There's differences between the anterior and posterior portions of these layers. So this is going to get relatively in depth, and we'll be breaking the 3 layers down for the next 15-20 minutes. And then you're going to want to study this by understanding where the fibrous, vascular, and inner layers are. Okay, so we'll jump into this and we'll review all of this at the end. Okay, so the 3 layers are the fibrous, the vascular, and the inner, and this is from the most superficial to the deepest layer of the eyeball. Now, inside the eyeball, you're going to have a cavity filled with fluids called humors. Okay, and if you're a history nerd like myself, you'll know that humors were described hundreds of years ago, and they were thought to be the life force of the bodies. So humors are going to be the fluids within the body. So in the eye, they were maintained as the aqueous and the vitreous humors. We're going to talk about that as we get into the different structures of the eyeball. The aqueous will be in the anterior portion. The vitreous is going to be in the posterior portion of the eyeball. And they maintain the shape of the eye, put pressure on the inner and vascular layers of the eye to maintain its shape. The lens separates the internal cavity into an anterior and posterior segments. So you have an anterior posterior cavity, and in the anterior cavity you also have anterior and posterior segments. Okay, so we're going to be discussing that. It gets a little bit tricky when we talk about that, because there's an anterior and posterior cavity, and then in the anterior cavity there's the anterior posterior segment. So this is what the eyeball will look like, and it looks daunting because yes, we're going to be discussing all the different components here, and you're going to need to know these different components. But after you go through it a couple of times, it should make some sense. A lot of what we're talking about, I'm sure you've heard the names in terms of before. So this is going to be the eyeball. The anterior portion here, this is going to be the optic nerve, where you're going to get all of the receptors. The information that you collect from the visual field is going to be sent to the occipital lobe. And here are the 3 layers. You have the fibrous, you have the vascular, and you have the inner layers of the eyeball. And you also have them going up into the anterior portion as well. And they look a little bit different. After you get past the lens, which is this guy right here, it's going to look differently. So you don't have the inner layer, the neural layer, in the anterior portion of the eyeball. The fluids are also going to be different. Okay, so again, we'll come back to this picture, but we're going to be discussing all of the different components individually, and you'll be able to label this diagram. Okay, here is an actual human eye that was dissected. So you can see the different fluids. You can see the layers here, one layer here, the fibrous, the vascular layer, and then you have the inner layer right here. It's very, very thin and delicate, and then you have the optic nerve and the optic disc. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the fibrous layer. So we're going to go from the most superficial layer to the innermost.
So the fibrous layer is the outermost layer. It's a dense avascular connective tissue. Okay, this fibrous layer is mostly fibers, hence the name fibrous layer. So it's going to be protecting the eye. It's going to be maintaining the shape of the eye. It's going to be holding the eyeball to the muscles to maintain its integrity within the bony orbit. Okay, so two regions of the fibrous layer are the sclera and the cornea. The sclera is going to be the posterior region. This is an opaque region. An opaque means that light does not pass through it. Okay, so it looks white. It looks like it has no color because all colors are, well, I should say it looks like it's white. So light does not pass through it. Okay, it protects, shapes the eyeball. It anchors extrinsic eye muscles so that when you do pull on this layer, it doesn't distort the shape of the eye itself. Because if you're pulling on the eye and it changes the shape of the eyeball, you actually distort your vision. Okay, because then you will see, then light will reflect and refract differently within the eyeball, and your shapes will look different. Okay. This is continuous with the dura mater of the brain posteriorly. So if it's continuous with the dura mater, well, it must be neural tissue. Okay? The dura mater is going to be the fibrous connective tissue surrounding the brain and the spinal cord. And that's going to be the thick, durable layer of the brain. So this dense connective tissue is a continuation of the dense connective tissue that we discussed in the central nervous system. The cornea is going to be the fibrous layer on the anterior 1/6 of the fibrous layer. It's transparent, so you can let light pass through. Okay, and so if you get light passing through, it means that you're going to bring that light into the eye so that it can hit the retina and create an image, creates that signal into the optic nerve. So the cornea actually bends light as it enters the eye, and this is very significant. I want you to write this down. The cornea bends light more than any other structure in the eye. It's going to come up, and it's going to come up multiple times. Okay, the lens is going to be the fine-tuning of bending of the light, but the cornea is going to bend the light the most. And it's important because you're bending light so that it focuses on your on the eye in a portion known as the fovea centralis, where you get the most distinguishing vision. Okay, so the cornea is going to bend the light the most to try to direct it specifically to the fovea centralis, where you're going to get your macula densa, and that's where you get your focal point. Sodium pumps of the corneal endothelium on the interface help maintain the clarity of the cornea, because if you start to create any sort of opaqueness, it actually will cause things like cataracts, which mean that you get a distortion of your vision. Light bends and refracts, which causes you to see images as fuzzy. So sodium pumps are constantly running to maintain that clear cornea. There are numerous pain receptors that contribute to blinking and tearing reflexes here, because if anything does scratches the cornea, it can lead to, again, distortion of vision. So you have to be very protective of the cornea and make sure that nothing irritates it, so that you can maintain vision and you can maintain the integrity of your eye. So this would be something that leads to the corneal reflex, which if you take that cotton swab and you swipe it on somebody's eye, and again you take it and you create that cotton swab that looks kind of like the hair on a troll's head, those little toy trolls, and you whisk somebody's eye so you're not doing damage to it. You just get the receptor to cause that blinking reflex, and that is used in medical offices, in doctors' offices. Okay, so that's the fibrous layer. So it's compared to the other layers, it's relatively simple. It's dense connective tissue. The cornea becomes a little bit more complicated, but the number one thing you need to know is it bends light as it enters the eye more than any other structure in the eye. So the vascular layer is going to be the middle pigmented layer, and as you can probably guess, the vascular layer is highly vascularized. So you have three different components to it. You have the choroid, the ciliary body, and the iris. And what those three layers are, those three components, will dictate what portion of the eyeball we are talking about. The choroid region is going to be the posterior portion. So the outer layer of that outside of that is going to be the fibrous layer of the posterior eye, where it's the avascular dense connective tissue. Okay. So it supplies blood to all layers of the eyeball. So it will supply nutrients to the retina. It will also supply nutrients to the fibrous layer. Okay, so if it's the vascular layer and it supplies blood, it's going to be very, very highly vascularized. There's going to be a lot of blood vessels going into and leaving this layer. It also contains what's known as a brown pigment. Now, brown pigment is going to absorb light so that it does not scatter and lead to visual confusion. Because if you have a pigment on that posterior portion in the vascular layer that reflects light, it goes back to the retina, and it creates this double signal, so that you have you essentially have this fuzzy vision in your eye, and it can create it's like a movement picture. So if you might not see this too often with our fancy cameras now that will actually create a very crisp image. But when I was younger, we had those disposable cameras where if somebody was moving while you were taking a picture, you created this fuzzy picture because it didn't have the clear, quick snapshot. And so that's essentially what would happen is if you had that reflection of the light, if the brown pigment did not absorb it. So it's important to absorb the light so it does not scatter, does not reflect, does not create a distortion of the image that you're trying to create in the brain. Okay, so the ciliary body is going to be anterior to the choroid. So this is a ring of tissue that surrounds the lens. And the lens is going to be the fine-tuning of bending light in your eyes. Okay, there's going to be smooth muscle bundles that control the lens shape here. So it's ciliary muscles in the ciliary body that control the shape of the lens. So when you contract those muscles, it will actually create more bending of light. The capillaries of the ciliary processes will secrete a fluid which is known as the aqueous humor, and we'll talk about that more once we get into the humors. Okay, so capillaries are going to essentially create this filtrate that forms the aqueous humor. And so filtrate of the blood plasma means you don't have the red blood vessel or red blood cells, the white blood cells, the different proteins, and it gets rid of certain ions that could cloud that vision. The ciliary zonule is going to be the suspensory ligaments that go from the ciliary muscles to the lens, and they suspend the lens in the right position. And as you increase tension on those ligaments, it will actually alter the lens's shape. And the iris, the last portion of the vascular layer, is the colored part of the eye. That's what gives you the blue, the green, the hazel, all those different kinds, all those different colors of the eye that surround the pupil. Okay, the pupil is just an opening of the iris, so it's a space. So there's nothing there except for the region where light passes through to get through the lens into the vitreous humor and into eventually the retina. So the pupil is the central opening that regulates the amount of light entering the eye. So you regulate the iris, which will actually open or close the pupil. So close vision and bright light will be the sphincter pupillae, that will be the circular muscles. They will contract and the pupils will constrict. So that will allow less light to get in, which means less scattering, and you can get close vision so you can read things closer to your face. Distant vision and dim light will be dilator pupillae, which will be the radial muscles. Those will contract, dilate the pupils, open them up, allow more light to pass into the eyes, and that will be for sympathetic fibers. which makes sense because if you're running away from a lion, it's not so much that you want to see what's really close to you. You want to see in the distance where you can go that will be safer. So if you're running, you want to be able to see that in the far distance and see a safe zone. Okay. So you have changes in the emotional state, which can lead to dilation of the pupils. So, for example, your pupils will dilate when subject matter is appealing or requires problem-solving skills. So, if you have something that is going to be very interesting, or if you see somebody attractive, your pupils will dilate. When you have more of a sympathetic mode, if you have anxiety, if you're, those are going to create more light coming into the eye, so you can get as much information as possible, essentially. So your parasympathetic is going to constrict those eyelids or those pupils. So your sphincter pupillae muscles contract, your pupil size decreases, and now you can have fine focus very close to you. So that would be like reading in bed. Okay, and then you have this dilator pupillae, which is going to be these muscles in the dilator pupillae muscle that will contract, and it will increase the size of the pupil, which means that you get more light passing into the eye. Okay, so we're gonna stop there for a second, and we'll come back to learn more about the retina, which gets relatively complicated.